going live. Assuming that it's going to go through and not be damaged by all of the curses that plague my channel.
Are you on? Did you put this on Twitter already? A
It'll
link so I
it'll
can.
automatically it'll automatically go onto Twitter. It should. If not, then I'll go ahead and get that set up here in a little bit. But we should be live now, and I will tweet this out in just a second, just to make sure in case my thing didn't already do so. But that said, how's it going, everybody? I know that normally on Mondays we have been covering the Biblical Gender Roles website, but I figured that we'd take a little break from that and instead talk with S.J. Thomason here, who I've covered on my channel before. I believe when you did the 11 questions episode that got talked about by practically everybody on the internet for a short while. Did that, and then I'm trying to fill in dead air as I tweet. But I did that one, and then afterwards, me and her had a conversation on Steve McRae's channel about the 11 questions thing, and then I believe it was either before or after that, I'm not certain, where we did the massive non sequitur show thing. I don't remember if that was before or after the 11 questions episode.
Yeah, I think it was after. I think it was after. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to retweet your message here too, just to get it out. So so sorry for that
Fair
lack
enough.
of attention there. But no, we've chatted a lot, and you came on one time where we talked to Craig too, Craig Reed,
Yes,
and we had
and
a
then,
nice, amicable, friendly chat.
yep, we had our chat there, and then afterwards, me and Craig have done a few chats on his channel as well. So what that is all to say is to say that this is not a new thing. Me and SJ do have almost a year's worth of history at this point. And it's always pretty much been amicable history. We disagree on a lot of things, but we've never been at each other's throat about those things. The other reason that I point that out is I still get comments on my 11 questions episode saying, well, if you actually just talk to SJ about this, you're wrong on X, Y, and Z. And I'm just like, yeah, funny thing that I did do that, like literally right after this episode. So I don't know if you're just not looking at the internet, but it's there. But there are some people who we don't necessarily agree on. Now, this is not the topic of this episode, but it did happen to happen last night. So I figured that maybe we could do a quick synopsis of the red pill religion debacle that happened on Twitter last night, as I don't want to use the word entertaining because it was certainly not that.
No, it was pretty bad. It was, what happened was I went onto Shannon Q's timeline because I spotted a picture of a waterfall and it was absolutely beautiful. So she had posted it, and I went on her timeline, and she and Paula Gia were visiting each other in Nova Scotia, and she was posting these absolutely beautiful pictures of like waterfalls and some other really neat scenic pictures of that area. And so I think I retweeted a couple of her tweets, and then that caught, and I suspect it came from me, somehow that caught Max's attention, and I'm pretty sure it was Max who was the person behind that wheel on the RPR philosophy tweet site.
Especially
And
because
he
he
jumped
quoted
in.
Dean Esme during some of the debacle. So I'd imagine
Oh
that
yeah,
it's either Dean or somebody who holds Dean in high reverence.
yeah. So that was pretty, but it got pretty bad because he started saying some very, very derogatory things about Shannon and about Paul, and they were below the belt. I mean, they were not kind. And I asked him to stop. And at first he sounded like he was going to stop, and it got worse. And then I just closed out the thread and got away from it. But this morning I got up and I saw some of the tweets that came in, and they were really bad. And
Yeah.
so he really does owe her an apology. He owes Paul an apology. Cy Gart actually wrote a pretty nice tweet on that, and I liked it because it basically said, Max, you owe them an apology. That was way beyond and very beyond what you should do, and it was very unchristian. And as a Christian, we're supposed to be showing our good side. We're not supposed to be showing this real ugliness, which is what came out from him.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Shannon and Paul. Anybody who came into the conversation seemed to get the ire of the RPR tweeter. I want to say it's Dean, but I also don't want to say it's Dean because there's always that chance that it's not. And I don't want to throw somebody under the bus who there's plenty of reasons to throw Dean under the bus without pulling this up. He's done enough on his own without this being added to it, if this is somebody else. But no, I know that a Godless Engineer got thrown into there again. Did you see what he wrote on GE during that?
No, I didn't. I didn't. That's the part where I got out.
I actually have the tweet saved for posterity's sake because I don't like saying things like this unfounded. But here we are. If it's readable here, if
Oh,
it
it's.
shows
Oh
up.
wait. Okay, this is just low of you. Oh, John, like, oh my gosh, yeah. No, see,
Yeah,
that's not
and
that's
that's
not.
just the stuff.
And again, I'm not 100% sure it is Dean. That's the one issue that because
Yeah,
there's a few people. You remember when he had an account on Twitter before? It was like multiple people would go on that account and tweet out of it, and I actually communicated with some of them via direct message. So I know that there were multiple different people sometimes tweeting out of that account. So I'm not 100% sure it's Dean. It could be like there's another guy called Buckley.
mhm.
There's some other people who it possibly could be, but I've never seen the level of anger that I saw last night out of that particular account before.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I'm also hesitant to say that it's Dean because, like I said before, there are things. I just realized I said live scream instead of live stream for that tweet. I feel really silly. Thanks, Twitter. Thank you, autocorrect. You're helpful. But no, there's plenty of things that Dean has done and said in the past that can earn my ire. Whoever is behind this account, though, has earned my ire. Now, what's funny is there was also one thing they said, and we're not going to stay on this topic terribly long because it's not the topic we're here to talk about today. But there was one thing that was said during this where I chimed in because Skyler Fiction chimed into the conversation, and I pointed out that something that the account holder had said sounded like projection to me. And then he got on to me and was like, "Oh, well, sirs, you're a coward who hasn't responded to any of my responses on you." Like, well, first of all, I don't necessarily owe you video responses. I don't owe anybody that. Secondly, you've done video responses on me. That wasn't really on my radar. Thanks for letting me know, though. I remember that they did a video response to like the big non sequitur collaboration a year ago, and I didn't respond to it a year ago, so I don't feel like I need to do it now. If there's
I don't.
more,
I agree with you. I don't even know. I mean, I've seen a lot of videos responses to mine. I don't even. I've gotten to the point where I don't even want to watch them most of the time. I've watched a couple of them, and other times I might start watching it, and I think this is a terrible waste of my time, and this person's just making stuff up about me, or misrepresenting me, and I get frustrated, and so I just don't even watch it. I don't acknowledge it, and I won't tweet about it because I don't want other people finding it. So it happens.
yeah, the Twitter's a dumpster fire. It really is, and it's just during that whole thing when I pointed out that you guys aren't really on my radar. The Red Pill Religion crew aren't on my radar. I'm peripherally aware that they exist. I know that they do videos, but I don't watch the channel because I don't care to. They were just like, well, if we're not on your radar, why are you responding? And like, you mean responding to something Skyler Fiction posted on Twitter, which is a public forum? I wasn't sure I had to explain why I was on Twitter. That's okay, sure. So yeah, anyway, that was a fun debacle last night. It'll be one of those things that's looked back on for a few months as that giant drama blow up that needn't have happened, but it did. So here we are. We live in the world where it's happened.
Yeah, yeah, and I think and what's kind of sad is when you think about it, Paula Gia flew all the way over to see Shannon. He lives halfway across Canada, I guess, and so he flew all the way to see her, have a nice weekend with her. They're posting all these romantic pictures, and all of a sudden, I mean, it was bad. So I just honestly hope he apologizes or wakes up and repents. I mean, come on.
I'm not even 100% certain if were I in Shannon's shoes, I don't know if I would really accept the apology. The most I would probably do would just be, I accept your apology, but I forgive so tentatively that I'll never forget. So I'm just not going to have a conversation with you ever again. And that's probably what I would take. But I don't want to. I don't want to speak for Shannon or step into her shoes. I just know that were I in that situation, I'm not exactly certain how. I'm not sure how forgiving I would or could be during that.
See, I think the idea you can forgive them, you can apologize, you can forgive, and you can move on. It doesn't mean you have to be their buddies or communicate with them ever again. So,
True, and
you know,
I can at least get behind that because at that point any possible like ability to be somebody's friend after they've done something like that, I would just go, well, at this point, I'm so hesitant to be around you because I don't know if the knife is near my back or where it might be. So I would just avoid them at that point. But it's Steve McRae in the chat, God, I love my spankings. I'm sure that was in response to something, but I don't quite know what.
I got to go find that. I have to find I got to get on the link on my phone here because I've got this screen open. So.
Gotcha. Do you have, you're doing this on a laptop, right?
Yes.
Okay. You can, one thing that if it's strong enough to do so, you can plug an HDMI cord into your laptop and then hook it into a TV. And then you'll be able to have the live screen. Like, I wouldn't recommend doing it right now, but you can have the live stream going on whatever monitor or TV that you have over there as well, if that's easier. That's a thing you can do during live broadcasts.
Yeah, that sounds pretty clever.
That's a thing that I used to do. It saved me a lot of time, especially like right now I have a dual monitor setup because this gets really awkward without dual monitor for me. But the actual topic at hand, now that we've got the happenstances of yesterday out of the way and completely done with, and they might come up in conversation again, they might not. If they don't, I'm not going to miss it. The actual conversation today is going to be about things that atheists are not, and granted, this is not all atheists, this is not all Christians. If it were, I've got examples for both that show why it's not all, but there are a subsect of atheists and Christians who have points they argue so strongly against, as if these things affect their positions at all. And the way that I've worded it is the things that these people fear. This is more of a playful usage of the word fear. I'm not meaning you're actually afraid of something. Just like I doubt there's a creationist out there who's actually afraid of the theory of evolution. I doubt there's an atheist who's a mythicist out there who's actually afraid of an historical Jesus. But I am using that word a little more playfully because these are things that I see fought against violently, caustically, and I don't quite understand why. So the first thing is the historical Jesus. A lot of atheists who take the mythicist position, I've seen recently, and it may have always been the case, it may not have been always been the case, but very recently, if you bring up the possibility of a historical Jesus, many of them seem to get like it's like their tribalism turns on immediately, where they immediately go, oh, well, Josephus wasn't a contemporary of Jesus. And you're just like, well, he was. No, he was born after. That's not what contemporary cares about. Contemporary just means whether they existed in the same time period. They did, ergo, he was contemporary. And one thing that happened during that conversation today was somebody said that, oh, well, Josephus didn't even mention Jesus. He mentioned Croesus. And I'm like, that's actually Tacitus. Stop.
that was Bigfoot Monday. I remember I saw that conversation, and and then he said he was going to quietly delete his email. I mean, his tweet.
They did redact it afterwards because they were like, "Oh, you're right." And I'm like, "That's fine." And I'm not trying to throw them under the bus in saying that, but it's that kind of behavior that I find interesting when people get in and fight the position so hard. And then one person accused me of appealing to an argument from authority when I said that, well, most historians agree that Jesus existed. Well, that's an argument from authority. No, it's not. An argument from authority in philosophy, which if you're going to say it's an argument from authority, you must be talking about that because we're bringing in fallacies. An argument from authority is saying that something is true because somebody said it. If I say that historians agree on a historical Jesus, that's not me saying it's true because historians say it. That's me saying that historians agree on a body of facts that seem to suggest a historical Jesus.
Right. It's not a fallacy when you call on the right experts. You're calling on the correct experts and you're just citing them. So that's not fallacious. Fallacious is when you call on non-experts in a field and try to cite them. Like if I called on Richard Dawkins and tried to cite him for moral reasoning as a philosopher or something, that's not going to make much sense.
No, and even then, even if you call on the right sources, if you say that it's true simply because they say it, that's also the fallacy. It's never true because the right source said it. It's only true because it happens to be true. Now, if they have the evidence that it's true, which, if we're talking about most of the historians here, they do. We have more evidence for Jesus than we do Alexander the Great, for instance, and we accept Alexander the Great. They have a body of evidence that they utilized, and me, as a layperson, I defer to the experts. That's not an argument from authority. And yet there are people who will fallaciously call that out as an argument from authority because they need so desperately to defend their position, and I don't get it. In a recent video, like probably about a month ago, Apologia did a video where he mentioned the possibility of historical Jesus and brought it in the video, and his comment section blew up with mythicists who were actively just super angry at Paul for bringing up the possibility of a historical Jesus. And I'm just like, well, why? Let's assume, for instance, that you're right and Jesus was myth, and there's no we'll ignore the fact that 1 in 26 people were named Yeshua in Judea at the time, so there's a high likelihood of whichever prophet started that religion being named Jesus, just based on probability. Let's ignore all that. Let's just say you're right and your position's true. You're an atheist. Cool. Now what happens if you're wrong and there's a historical Jesus? So now we have a man in Judea that the cult stemmed from whose name happened to be Yeshua. Are you still an atheist? Yes. Did this change your position? No. Does it really matter now? Probably not. So it's weird to me. It's not weird to me that mythicists exist, because it's not so fringe a theory that it's problematic, but it is still a bit of a fringe theory. I have Richard Carrier's books on the topic. I have read them. I do like them, even if I think that his use of Bayes' theorem is malformed. Regardless, and I think we actually talked about this when I went on your channel with Craig, because you and Craig asked me if I was a historicist or a mythicist. I lean a lot more towards historicity now than I did at the start of that conversation from a year ago. But it's, even after going over the literature myself, I'm just like, this doesn't do anything to change an atheistic position. Whether it's right or wrong, nothing hinges on it. So the fact that people seem to have a horse in the race that they've bet so highly on that it matters, it confuses me, and I don't quite understand it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something that, I mean, one thing, I had Gary Habermas on my channel a few days ago, and we were talking a little bit about the mythicist position, and he pointed out that he knows of only 2 people who have terminal degrees who actually support that position, who have terminal degrees in the field from an accredited university, or in a related field to that. And he said Richard Carrier and Robert Price, and neither of them have an academic position in a university, and he feels it's because people wouldn't take them very seriously. So
true. And like, even though I know that like on the Historicity of Jesus has gone through the peer review process, even in there's still assigned about a 33% probability of a historical Jesus, even in one of the works that is used and cited most in this argument. It still grants a possibility of a historical Jesus in the work, and yet somehow, if I grant this on Twitter, there are people who freak out about it and go, no, Josephus wasn't contemporary, no this, or they say something was said by Josephus that was actually said by Tacitus, and just go through the entire gamut. And I'm just like, okay, well, I've read the literature on this, and obviously you've read some of it too, but none of this changes anything.
No, it shouldn't. And, I just finished reading Bart Ehrman's book, Misquoting Jesus. I've got another book of his in my computer ready to go at some point here. But I just finished reading his book. And I mean, he makes a lot of cases for the historicity of Jesus. So he's perfectly happy as an agnostic, and he can have that position. So it shouldn't be threatening to people.
No, it shouldn't. And I know that, like, people don't necessarily find it threatening in the capacity that it would do something against their belief or it would actively threaten them, because they'll just grant, oh, well, I'm not threatened by it. If he was real, then he was just a cult leader in Judea. And I'm like, okay, cool. So you've just explained why we shouldn't be having this conversation in the first place, and yet we're here. So if it's so inconsequential, then it would be problematic. Whereas the other side of the conversation that we're going to get to in a little bit is on evolution. And it's kind of the same deal here, where if you take the Bible literally, like if you do a full-on literalist approach, you ignore all hermeneutics, all exegesis, any scholarly work, and you just take your good old King James version, which seems to be the go-to for some Christians, I don't know why, then yes, evolution would undermine the story of Genesis. But that's the thing, is that a lot of that stuff wasn't literal, and we can even go in through exegesis and figure out where things were used literally, where they weren't. So it doesn't undermine that. So we've got the other side of the debate, where we've got some Christians who fall into the young earth creationist category, who for some reason think that evolution flies in the face of their theism. which doesn't make any sense to me.
No, and there's some very good places where people can go for resources like Biologos, or there are some people who are biologists who know evolution. They're very familiar with evolutionary biology, like Dr. Cy Gart, and this doesn't threaten him. It doesn't threaten a lot of people. There are many people. Now I was raised Catholic, and that's the biggest Christian sect out there. And I've never heard of the argument for a young Earth creation in the Catholic Church, and I don't think it's something that through the ages was something that was even brought up. So it's a new phenomenon. I understand it came about with the Seventh-day Adventists a couple hundred years ago. So this is relatively new.
It's actually even more recent than that. I believe it started in the mid 1900s with a guy named Robert Hoyle, I believe was his name, who
I
actually
thought it came out before. Okay.
The actual sex. That's where I grabbed your picture from for the thumbnail. But let me see here. I had this article pulled up. It's a Wikipedia article, so obviously it still needs some better sourcing. But let us see here. Where is it from? Who started? Oh, wait, I remember what it is. So, there's a difference between young Earth creationism and the young Earth creationist movement, just like there's a difference between atheists and the atheist movement. But it seems to be that, let's see, since the mid-20th century, Henry Morris is the person we're talking about. Yeah. Henry Morris was the one who started the entire young Earth creationist movement thing in the mid 1900s. And he was born in 1918, and he started a lot of this. His deal was saying that, we have to challenge the science on this. And then there was another separate scholar, who was a Scottish scholar, who went through the genealogy of the Bible, and through that genealogy came up with a figure somewhere along the lines of like 6,400 years. And through doing so, when you put those two things together, you have a movement that says that we want to assert that evolution's wrong and that the Earth is young. And then you've got another scholar saying, well, the Bible only contains about 6,400 years of information, which may or may not be the case. And it's really easy to post hoc just grab that literature and shove it into your ideology. And now we have a young Earth creationist movement saying the Earth is 6,000 years old, even though the Bible doesn't say that, and you have to read into the literature heavily to even get that as a end result. So
I agree. So thank you for correcting me on that. I'll have to look into the history. I must have either heard it wrong or seen it wrong somewhere. So
I could also be wrong. Remember that I'm pulling this at least from Wikipedia. I still need to go through and look at the sources for a lot of the stuff to make sure that the article is accurate. But that seems to be what a lot of this is stemming from, is Henry Morris.
Yeah. Interestingly, I just had Kent Hovind on my channel last week, and he debated Joel Edmund Anderson, who's an old earther. And so I did discover that at least Kent supports the King James Version, as you mentioned. And so that's so there are a lot of people who are King James onlyists, and I think you've weren't you raised a King James onlyist in a young Earth creation?
I was raised a King James onlyist in a young Earth creation private school. It was a Pensacola Christian Academy, which was actually built by independent Baptists. So it's the same religion the same denomination that Kent Hovind and Stephen Anderson and Matt Powell find themselves in, was what I grew up with. Now, the school itself was technically non-denominational. They accepted Catholics and other types of Christians as well with no issue, probably because it meant that they got more funding that way. But the school that I went to was actually founded by two people, both independent fundamental Baptists, young Earth creationists, one of which carried the last name Becca, or Abeka, which led into the creating of the Abeka literature curriculum, which I'm fairly certain you're familiar with that. So
that's really, so in that curriculum that you were in, let me just ask you this, because I'm not totally familiar with that. No, let me ask you, what were you taught as far as age of the year? I mean, were you taught evolution? Were you taught different things?
What we were taught was that the Earth was 6,000 years old, That was the age of the earth because of the genealogy in the Bible. If you did something on biology, a lot of times you would have to actually cite scripture. So, like, we'd have to write in things from Romans to support something on biology for some strange reason. And then when we talked about evolution, it was taught as a footnote. And the footnote basically went, Charles Darwin created the theory of evolution in order to lead people away from Christ, to say that people were all monkeys. He was wrong. He had a deathbed conversion, and that was it. And he renounced the theory at his deathbed. And that was what we were taught about evolution in school, which was just lovely. Really, really good scholarly methods.
Well, you see, the problem with that, and obviously you know what the problems are because you encountered it yourself, but the problem with that is when you teach people that, then they go to college and they take classes that they're forced to take. Like, for example, all colleges have a baccalaureate core, and you have a choice of certain classes. You have a choice to take classes in the sciences. And so one of the classes I took was historical geology, and it would have knocked my socks off had I had a young Earth upbringing and going in and taking a class like that, because you learn about
well, there's a way PCA gets around that. They have their own college. They have the school itself is K through 12, and then they have a little river between the school and the college itself. The college also has 2 different summer camps, so there's potentiality, as what almost happened to me. It is very likely that you can go through your entire curriculum only in this, even getting into college, so that you never get introduced to any of those other ideas outside of what they want you to know, which is what almost happened to me. But I requested, as I was going into the 6th grade, I requested to go into the public sphere instead of the private sphere for education, and my mom acquiesced and let me go to a magnet school, and went to there instead of my school and got an entire year of nothing but culture shock.
Oh gosh, I can imagine. Yeah. I know I had kind of a similar upbringing. I went to a Catholic grade school. We were taught everything just regular. Nothing was contrived, I don't think. And then I went to a Catholic all girls high school in my freshman year, and I hated that it was all girls. I just did not. I mean, I don't. As a woman, I can say this. I'm being around a bunch of girls. It can get a little out of hand. I mean, there's just lots of backstabbing, lots of stuff like that, and I didn't like it at all. So I requested to go to a public school, and my parents said, "Okay, yeah, you can go to the public school." And I love that education. It was wonderful. So I stayed in the public school. I tried 3 different public colleges. Now I teach at a private one, but tried 3 public ones. They're all great education as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, granted, there's obviously enough that is wrong with our education system that needs to be reformed. We do have, for the public sphere, we do have a very industrial age education structure that could use some improvements, but it's still leaps and bounds better than going to a young Earth creationist theological school for your tutelage. Luckily, I didn't actually have to experience the standard education system until 9th grade, because my middle school was a magnet school that had what was called stream courses. So instead of having your standard, this is your math class, this is your history class, this is your literature class, you had you would take a trimester class where you only studied one subject. So say you wanted to study flight. Instead of a history class, you would study the history of flight, the history behind people like Amelia Earhart and the Wright brothers. And then instead of having an English class, you would just have to write a paper on what you learned in that history class. And then instead of having a mathematics and physics class, you would have to actually construct airplanes and have them fly properly, like out of balsa wood, not full-on airplanes. And you would learn your geometry and physics doing that. So I went from really horrible education to a really interesting experimental education system, and then it was only in my high school years that I actually got into the standard public sphere.
Yeah, that's one of the things, is the way that the schools are structured and the way that the curriculum is structured sometimes isn't the best way as far as learning. People really shouldn't be sitting at their desks the whole time. There should be some sort of action and movement, because they've shown, as far as they've shown that if people get exercise before they start classes or before they do training sessions, they're more likely to retain the material. If the material is spaced out, they're more likely to reflect on it, so they'll retain it better. There's all these different things that are out there that the schools aren't doing, which is kind of sad. But
yeah.
I know they're working on it.
Well, we need
Actually, I have to say, I my kids are at this public middle school right now, and I think their education's phenomenal there. It's an A-rated school, and that's why we live in this neighborhood. Actually, purposely picked the neighborhood because of the school. But the algebra that my oldest son is going through, I'm quite impressed that they're teaching what he's learning at this point. So it's really good.
Yeah, it was weird to me that like I was learning algebra back in early middle school and even a little bit at PCA has even though their education system's bunk, they still had accelerated education. So certain things that you can't get wrong, like mathematics, they taught you earlier. So like I learned algebra in 5th grade, and then when I got to high school and they were like, "Here's your algebra 1 course," and I'm like, "I have to take this again?"
Yeah, no, my oldest son is taking a high school level algebra class, even though he's in the 8th grade. So they put him ahead on that, and so it's pretty nice.
I think that allowing for fast track education is a good idea. I know we've gotten decently off topic, but this is still technically on topic because a lot of the young Earth creationist mindset seems to be that homeschooling is the absolute best way to go about it, because then you don't have your children subjected to the evils of the outside world, basically. Like I know that I don't know if you're familiar with Guzman at all. He's one of Matt Powell and Steven Anderson's little proteges, as it were.
No, I'm not. I'm familiar with Matt Powell and Steven Anderson, though. So I've heard their stuff.
Well, if you've heard their stuff, then you've heard Guzman's stuff, because on his channel he's working on becoming a preacher, but he's had all of his tutelage under Steven Anderson and Powell. So whenever you look at anything that he says on his channel, he goes through all the mannerisms, he goes through all the talking points, and he goes through everything almost verbatim, like as if he was reading off of Anderson's own script. And it's a little disheartening because the kid's only like 13 years old. So I'm seeing this heavily indoctrinated kid who's saying things that are very wrong. And it's not just things about, reality, because, obviously if you get something wrong about evolution, it's not going to bother me. You can be wrong, and I'll point out when you're wrong, but I already know that I defer to experts on this more so than somebody who's getting a lot of the stuff wrong. So, you do you. But he's actively trying to get other people to believe what he's saying, and there's where I start to hold some issue, because I'm like, well, if you want to be an influencer, then please at least be right on things like this. And especially if you're going to be an influencer on something like theology, which affects people's lives more than anything. The two things that affect your life the most are politics and religion, even though those are the things we're told not to talk about. But they are the two things with the most direct impact on most people's lives. So when he's spouting a lot of the stuff that's just wrong, I get really disconcerted, because if it's an adult saying a lot of these things, it's bad. But when it's a kid saying a lot of these things, I see really heavy manipulation of the child, and that bothers me.
Yeah, well, the thing is, here's the thing with the young Earth position. I'm okay if somebody wants to be a young Earther. I've actually met some pretty intelligent people like R.M. Huffman, who's a doctor, medical doctor, and he's a young Earther. Mm-hmm. So I hesitate to say much about it, because I have a lot of people who, just like on your channel, when I say something about young Earth creationism, I have a lot of people jumping down on my channel too, who are young Earth creationists. And they're like, well, why would you say this? And why would you think that? And, you were slanting it more towards Joel Edmond. It was obvious you agreed with him more. And I thought, oh no, because I don't want to disenfranchise them. But it's just that I don't think that people, if you look at the Bible and you look at the genealogies, for example, it doesn't say that these are all exactly in a row. I mean, the idea is we have two different genealogies. One genealogy is out of Matthew. One genealogy is out of Luke. They take different perspectives, and they don't even have the exact same number of people they're citing. So the idea is they cited the ones they considered the most important in the lineage. They didn't necessarily cite all of the people in the lineage. So there's a lot of ways to get past some of the arguments that they have. Hugh Ross has done a phenomenal job of writing up a lot of this stuff and his perspectives on Hugh Ross is a cosmologist, essentially. So he gives his perspectives on the formation of the earth, and how he actually looked at the book of Genesis. He wrote a couple of books on this, and he looked at how in the beginning, and how some of the things that occurred actually did occur in the formation of the earth. So he compared that in a scientific way, which is pretty neat. But I think here's my fear, is that people think, hey, because we have this view, their view gets very complicated. Like, for example, when we find something that's around that we can date to say 10,000 BC, what do they do? How do they deal with that? Or if we find, what's another example that has made me think? When I was talking to Joel Edmund Anderson, he said that he went and visited Kent Ham's Ark, and he said that they have dinosaurs like in the exhibit, these fake little statue dinosaurs, and he's teaching that the dinosaurs were mingling around with humans at the same time. I mean, that's the kind of it doesn't make any sense, and unfortunately it's going to steer people to atheism. I mean, people are going to get so upset with the church raising them and sort of teaching them these things when they go out into the world and they do their own studies. They're going to, possibly leave their faith. They'll for sure leave their faith, but then they're possibly even going to leave belief in God altogether. And so that to me is
because it all seems like it's coming from the young Earth position, which is wrong. I have met several JMD Apologetics. I don't actually know what James's position is. James from a Modern Day Debate. I haven't asked him what his position on this is specifically. But I've met enough reasonable Christians to go, no, they're not all just people who say horrible things and then justify it by using the Bible. Yes, those people exist, and yes, those people need to be called out when they do it. It is one of the reasons why my channel exists. But it does not mean that everybody who's like that does that. I would rather, for instance, I would rather be friends with a reasonable Christian than an unreasonable atheist, based just solely on the merit of them being an atheist. Because I've met several atheists who say that, all religious people are mentally ill because they believe in a sky daddy who doesn't exist. And I'm like, well, you can think that, but I could go ahead and just look into DSM-5, and the minute I find religion in there, I'll let you know, but I know I won't. So if you want to call
you bring up a good distinction, and it's actually something. Have you heard of a guy called Adam Friended?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so I'm going on his channel on the 27th, and I'm pretty excited about it. But he's an atheist, but he's a very unique atheist. Like, he's actually taken made a lot of videos calling out what he calls anti-theists. So he really distinguishes the atheists from the anti-theists. And I have to say, I don't agree with all of his videos. I know he had Shannon Q on one or two of them. And I don't really think that put her in a good light. So I don't agree with that one. But I did find his videos on Matt Dillahunty, and maybe it's just my own personal feelings towards Matt Dillahunty, but I did find those to be really funny. I mean, really funny. So, but anyway, and that's taken there are these people out there, I encounter them all the time, who say, you're sky daddy, and you're all delusional, and so. Do you wonder where that comes from? Do you think a lot of that might come from people who maybe read Richard Dawkins' book? Because his book called Christians pretty much delusional.
So, well, one in Dawkins' book, he does specifically point out that he's using the word a little more playfully and that he was advised against using it. That said, I'm still not terribly impressed with the God Delusion as a book. I own it, just like I own Hugh Ross literature, just like I own Richard Carrier literature, even though I don't agree with many positions of all three of those people. I still own and have bought their stuff. In fact, I think you and me were on a stream together when I bought my first Hugh Ross book, Improbable Planet.
You have that book? That's fantastic.
Yes, I do. Because
that's good.
Well, that's like when
book too.
I have zero reason to discount somebody's position unless I'm actually going to go ahead and look into it. So, as an example, when somebody says that the Bible says X, usually what I will do is I'll go into a resource that actually lets me look at the original Hebrew words for things, and I'll see if the Hebrew, if we're talking Old Testament, obviously, I'll see if it matches up with what they're saying. Usually it doesn't, but I still try to do my due diligence and exegete that book properly, because, for instance, when somebody tries citing Romans 1, for all atheists know, or all people know God in their heart. And I'm like, well, actually, no, Paul was talking to a specific church that fell away from Christ when he did that. He was meaning that church all knew God in their hearts. That was the historical context of that. And just like when there's another citing from Paul that said that all women should be silent. And I'm like, well, no, he was talking about a very specific church at that point, that he did not agree with the way that they were doing things. He didn't agree with the way the women were doing things in that church. That was not a statement for all people, period, to follow at all times. That was a statement for one church that has historical context. And I'm an atheist going, no, the literature doesn't support what you're saying.
Bart Ehrman, actually, one thing I have to say out of his book that I just read is I was impressed that he actually identified that same passage, 1 Timothy 2:12, and he had his about very similar observation as you're having, and a similar explanation for it. And I feel like I need to tag you in on all these tweets that met me sometimes.
You seem to be lagging out.
To shut up.
Oh, there we go. Maybe.
They say, you can't preach to men. Shut up. 1 Timothy 2:12. I get that all. Shoot. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
You can hear me now? Okay, something happened. I got a sign on my computer that said my internet connection's unstable, so I'm trying to see what I can do.
You sound like you're...
Is it better now?
You sound like you're going better now.
Okay. Worst case scenario, I think it's better now. It's the signs. Let me just look at the connection here.
Well, this is why I think me and RCA are probably going to be doing a video at some point. I don't know quite when. I have a few videos that are collaborations with Christians coming up. I've got one with Catholic Fusionists that we've been talking about, but we haven't been able to make a lot of headway on yet, on why Catholics are real Christians. Because there's a talking point young Earth creationists have that, Catholics aren't real Christians because X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, no, they are. They're a different denomination than you are. That doesn't make them less Christian. It makes them... There are things that they do that you might not agree with. There are things they do that I don't agree with. But if you want to say that they're not Christian, then they're just going to say that you're not Christian, and you two are just going to be butting heads against each other until the cows come home. You're not going to be making any progress because you two are going to come from the exact same standpoint. So I've got that one, and then I've got one with RCA on how Steven Anderson doesn't properly exegete the Bible, which is problematic because when he talks to his congregation, he says some fairly awful things and tries to use the Bible as the supporter for those fairly awful things. I'm just like,
that's really interesting. You're going with RCA because he wanted to debate me on Catholics being Christians, and his view is that they aren't Christians. So it's interesting you're debating.
Well, that's why RCA. That's why RCA isn't going to be with me on the Are Catholics Christian video. RCA is going to be there for the exegesis video, more than likely. But Max, the Catholic Fusionist, who I debated on Non Sequitur show on pro-life versus pro-choice, we obviously came from different positions on there. But he's the one that I'm going to because he's got a master's in theology and is a Catholic, and specifically studies their history. That's his wheelhouse. So I'm grabbing him in for that video.
That's great.
And both of them have the exact same point, which is saying that people like Steven Anderson need to stop doing what they're doing because they're wrong. So,
well, I don't like the view that Catholics aren't Christian. I mean, number one, obviously I have a personal bias. I was raised a Catholic. I went to Catholic.
And your internet seems to be mucking up again.
I know a lot of Catholics, and they're all very good people. Does that mean they agree with everything that the Pope does? No idea why this is doing this. I don't.
Are you? You're not hardwired in, right? You're just using your Wi-Fi.
I have two boxes. Yeah. I have two. I wonder if I should just go down. Then I'm away from my thing here. Let's see here. I guess I could carry that. Well, I have another connection here. Let me just try something real quick and see if I can't get this to.
Because it seems to be just after 30 minutes of constant connection, your connection's trying to do a dead.
Can you hear me? Is it better now?
That sounds a
little. Can you hear me,
better.
Cyrus?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. I disconnected and reconnected, but I don't know if I mean, worst case scenario, I'll just run to a different room. This room, unfortunately, is kind of far away from the original thing. I could go into the other room and connect myself to the hard wire.
Fair enough.
Can you?
Well, It sounds
Is it
like you're
still, is it
stable.
better? Okay. Is it all right now?
Yeah, it sounds like you're stable now.
Darn it.
No, I'm saying it sounds like you're stable now. It sounds like you're good now. How long
Okay.
that'll last, I don't know. But
Yeah, it looks good on the thing. The my connection looks a little, all the bars are up right now, so hopefully that helps.
hopefully it'll stay that way. That would be useful. But I think the main point though with all of that is that, for instance, there are young Earth creationists that think that if they agree that Catholics are Christians, that it undermines their position somehow, when it doesn't. There are young Earth creationist Christians who think that if they grant any credibility to the theory of evolution, that it undermines their position, but it doesn't. And a lot of that stuff just bothers me. And I think the other thing that bothers me on all that is that a lot of them seem to be KJV onlyists, and I am not 100% certain why there's any adherence to the King James version of the Bible. I think literally all of the scholarly consensus is that it's a bad translation at this point.
You know what's really interesting is I was raised in a school where we did use the KJV. I mean, that we mainly used, and I never really thought much of it. It's not, to me, it really doesn't matter which version people use. But yeah, that's actually a less accurate version because there were other versions that were created from the Greek manuscripts. So that's actually less accurate. So I love this NIV. That's the one I have. But I've seen other people using the ESV. I think they're both pretty good. To me, it's kind of nice going back to different versions.
I think that
Is that it? Am I following? Am I going out?
it's going out a little bit, but it's enough to where I can understand what you're saying. My usual go-to is going to something like the New American
Oh,
Standard
that's
version,
bad.
because that seems to be a little more accurate to some of the original meanings of some words. A lot of times, the New American Standard version, the translation in there flies directly in the face of something that was said in the KJV version, which is really interesting to me. I have a video that's coming up next week on Gene Kim. I refuse to call him Dr. Keen Jim because I've looked at his actual college he went to get that doctorate, and it's not accredited, so I'm not going to use the honorific he didn't earn. But same thing with Hovind. I refuse to call him doctor. His accreditation was not legitimate, so he is not going to get a doctorate, or he's not going to get an honorific from me that he didn't earn. But the
Where did
genes
he? I don't even know where he went. Where he got his doctorate? Do you know where he actually got it?
with Kent Hovind, it was Patriot Bible University, which is actually just a trailer. Like, it's a single trailer that has zero accreditation, and they just basically just print diplomas. It's icky. You can look them up on
Diploma
Google
mill.
Earth.
That's
Yeah,
that's
it's a diploma mill.
okay.
Gene Kim's is as well. He has a legitimate bachelorate. His bachelor's degree is legit. It's from Berkeley. But then his doctorate is from either Pensacola Bible Institute, or there's another one. It's an acronym that's PBI, but both the acronyms that came from PBI were unaccredited colleges. So I'm just going to provide the link to all unaccredited colleges in the description below for anybody who wants to fact check me. But anyway,
I have to say, I used to evaluate a credit. I mean, I used to evaluate schools for transfer credits coming into the school I work at when I was associate dean. And one of the things about evaluating them is we checked accreditation. It's really important that people don't waste their money on these diploma mills. And there's a lot of them out there, like University of Phoenix, Walden University. I'm going to call them all out. They're bad. I don't take credits from those schools.
yeah.
We don't hire people from those schools, even though we get swamped with resumes all the time for people applying for faculty jobs who have those qualifications that we don't consider legitimate.
Yeah, and it's really bothersome when people. I feel I could be wrong, but I feel like some people go into those programs and they're legitimately duped. Like, they don't understand that they're not accredited. I know that my one of the wives that my dad used to have, he's had a few, but one of the ones that he used to have actually went through about 3 years of college education on an online course, not realizing that it was not an accredited institute. So when she went to a brick and mortar college later, none of her credits transferred over, and she didn't understand why. And we had to explain that, if it's not accredited, the credits don't transfer. That's how that works.
It's very sad, actually. It's very sad when we see that, because I do think a lot of people are duped. I don't think they realize. I have a friend who told me, he said, "Oh, I might go back and get my master's at Phoenix." I said, "No, please don't."
It's not going to do you any good.
No.
But one of the things that Gene Kim goes through in his video that I'm going to be presenting on, I think it's Wednesdays. It could be Thursdays. No, it's Thursdays. Wednesdays is the atheism versus agnosticism video, because apparently that's a conversation that's still being had. But Thursday's video, Gene Kim goes through the KJV and tries to make an argument against marijuana from the Bible. And I don't smoke. I don't have a horse in the race. But he goes through a bunch of the passages that say, be sober-minded or be of a sober mind. And when you look in the KJV, all those passages say sober. They say sober-minded. But when you look at every other translation of the Bible, none of them mention the word sober except for one, which is in Titus. And I'm just like, so what you're saying is you're using a bad translation to get a bad message. Got it. Awesome.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see. I don't like the idea of recreational marijuana, but it's purely selfish because I don't want my kids having easier access to it. So as soon as they get into their 20s, I'll be okay with recreational marijuana. It's totally selfish on my part, but
at least you recognize that, as opposed to trying to go in and say, well, actually, the Bible supports my position when it doesn't mention it. One of the things he uses in there, there's a moment in, it's either Titus or Romans, where a group of people are gathering herbs and stuff to eat, and they throw it into a pot, and they're cooking it in the pot, and they end up cooking a brew that basically can get you killed. And the passage in the KJV reads, "And in the pot is death." I can't remember which one it is. It's linked in that video, so I'll go through the video again and find it later, not right now. And that video will go up on Thursday for people who want to see it. But he says, oh, it's funny that even the Bible says in the pot is death. And I'm just like, so you don't know the difference between an herb and a clay pot? Okay. Excellent. This is where we are.
We have problems. I think one thing that probably both of us could say would be fair on both the... I see my bars are going down again. I might have to, you know what I might just do? I might just switch out of this. Hold on one sec.
Fair enough.
Trying to see if I have my other headset. Where did I put it?
Well, I guess I'll look through the section here for a little bit, since we are here. I do see that Pre-Trib is a fraud is here and is saying that I won't debate Kent Hovind and therefore I'm a coward, which is wonderful. You can think that. I don't debate people who I don't think are worth debating, and I don't find Kent particularly worth debating, so here we go. You want to call that cowardice, that's fine. People have called me names that are incorrect before. Doesn't bother me. Not a thing that bothers me at all. And SJ also says that SJ, as usual, doesn't defend her brothers in Christ. You don't have to defend somebody based on the merit that they're a Christian. Just like I don't have to defend somebody based on the merit that they're an atheist. If somebody's an atheist, but they say something wrong, I'm not going to just defend them and say, oh, this is my tribe partner. He is atheist. He is never wrong. That would be stupid of me to do. So, no. Nobody has to defend somebody based on the merit of them just being in your tribe.
Okay. I don't know if this is this a little better?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm in a different room right now. Let me just Pepper. Let me get my dog in here with me. Okay. So I'm just switching it up here. Hold on. It's quieter. Okay. So yes. People are saying that's the thing is I don't think that these positions necessarily have to go against. I don't think that you need to be a young Earth creationist or feel threatened by people who are old Earth creationists, because I think that it's just a reasonable view to be an old Earth person. I'm trying to figure out where I can get comfortable here. Okay. Move around this room a little bit. Okay. Yeah, this is a much better. I think I have a better connection now. So.
Hopefully it doesn't do any more dying. Also, Lazarus says that's Dr. Hovind to you. No, it's not. It's just Kent. He'll continue to just be Kent. I don't have to use any of the other pejoratives that have been ascribed to his name. I can just call him Kent, and that underlines him enough for me. That's fine.
So you have a lot of people in the chat then, huh?
We've got 114 viewers right now.
Really? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I need to go watch that. So I'm glad I get to a different room here, I guess.
Yeah, no. Also Steve McRae says that the money on the vine for young Earth creationism is drying up a little bit, which is true. In some cases, I wouldn't say the money on the vine is dying for like PCA, school I grew up in, but it is still dying a little bit. It's going to be a very slow fizzle fade out though. Excellence USA says the hammer is mightier than the sword. Spot the Dr. Horrible reference, layered in another pun. Yes. Oh my gosh. SJ, have you seen Dr. Horrible SingAlong blog?
No.
It is a Joss Whedon production. It was produced during the writer's strike of the early 2000s. He just produced a YouTube series with Neil Patrick Harris and a lot of his other people he usually uses for shows like Firefly. Grabbed a bunch of them together to do a show called Dr. Horrible Singalong blog, so he would have something to do during the writer's strike. And it's about the entire thing's about 40 minutes long. It's a musical, and it's very, very good. It's very low budget because, again, it was written during a strike, but it's very good if you're into Joss Whedon's work at all.
Well, that's good. I'll have to watch that. I've been spending lots of time lately watching Jordan Peterson videos, more Jordan Peterson videos. So
Fair enough.
I just keep going back and forth with that.
Let's see here. I only feel threatened.
Actually, you know what I saw? I just saw a debate this morning. I saw a debate between Jordan Peterson, William Lane Craig, and a woman whose last name's Goldstein, Rebecca Goldstein. Mm-hmm. And she's the atheist. And those two, you have William Lane Craig, who's a theist, Christian, and then you have Jordan, who's he's a theist. He says he lives as if there is a God. He loves the Bible, but he still hasn't said if he thinks Jesus resurrected. He hasn't actually put himself out there with that information, so we don't know exactly where he stands. But it was a super interesting debate, and it's now on YouTube for other people. But he talked a lot about objective morality, which I'm fascinated with.
Morality is a conversation that I've seen several people get threatened by that one, much in the same vein as other things we've talked about today. My view on it is that there are things.
What do you take? Do you have a position that's objective?
My position is that I'm a moral anti-realist. I find relativistic morals to be decently useful. I'm also a pragmatist, so a lot of this stems from what is or isn't useful. But I do think that there are points for objective morality that I have no issue with. Because for me, I don't have to have objective morality be an ultimate foundation for anything. For me, if somebody has an objective standard, regardless of what it is, then I'm fine with them calling that a type of objective morality. That does not bother me. But as far as ultimate objective standards, I don't think that it's ultimately objective. I think that that more relativistic standards are a little more feasible.
So I have a couple of studies that I'll reference, and I've referenced these before. So if anyone's listening and they've already heard these, you hear them again. But there's a study by a person called Kinnear.
Your connection broke up again. Say that one more time, just because the connection broke up.
Darn it. Okay, can you hear? Okay, there's a person called Kinnear, and the study came out in 2000, and Kinnear, and it's called Universal Moral Values. And it basically, he took a survey to people from all different religions around the world, Buddhists, Taoists, just about anything, Christians, and then even atheists and humanists, and and the United Nations. And he actually identified values that everyone ascribes to that are the same. So they're all, every single group was ascribing to something very similar to the golden rule, for example, with an objective moral duty. Now, I sometimes like to distinguish values from duties, but everyone has this objective moral duty to follow the golden rule. Now, whether people follow it, that's one thing. That's another issue. That's their actions, and whether their actions reflect what they know they ought to do. But that's something that's out there. And then there's a guy called Shalom Schwartz out of Hebrew University. And in 2012, he came out with another study on moral values or universal values. And that's the name of his study that you can find if you Google it. But Schwartz actually found a shocking finding. He distinguished people all around the world by their country, by their societies, and he found that in certain societies you're more likely to be a certain way. Like in
Oh, is this the
United
one
States,
on individualistic societies versus the more not Commonwealth societies, the
collective.
more collective societies? That's the word I was looking for.
No, that's what you're thinking of called Hofstede or Triandus. They do a lot of work on individualism and collectivism. But Schwartz does work on, he actually initially was surveying teachers all around the world in dozens of countries. And he found that people can be distinguished on their levels of, like, for example, self-enhancement versus self-transcendence. And within the enhancement thing in the United States, for example, we're hedonists. We're very achievement striving. We're focused on that kind of stuff. But he found that what was really interesting, and actually what he called shocking, is he said he was absolutely shocked to find that people all over the world hold the exact same value that we ought to be benevolent. That was the number one value for every single place around the world. And that tells me that, where did that come from? Like, why does everyone around the world happen to know that we ought to be benevolent? And I would make an argument that's because we have a moral, benevolent lawgiver.
I would say that it, again, this is probably the pragmatist in me speaking, but to me that seems to stem more from the fact that, evolutionarily speaking, as we evolve, we retain certain traits, and traits that are mutually beneficial for us as a society tend to be kept. So benevolence towards one another seems to be something that would be useful for a cohesive society, and human beings don't do well individually. We do better as a society. So to me, that would seem to be evidence that we've cohesively evolved in that. But that's just my take on it. I need to look at the papers that you're citing because I haven't actually read them yet.
Yeah, look at those papers, because there also is an argument that talks about selfishness, and we've also have selfish tendencies. And you look in the animal groups, and you look at the fact that animals sometimes, even in the primates, can act in selfish ways. And so why did we all know benevolent? Where did that come from? And there aren't necessarily evolutionary advantages to being, say, forgiving people or to helping the very weak. What are the evolutionary advantages to helping the poor people or leaning out and doing that kind of stuff? I know it certainly makes societies nicer when we go out and do that stuff, but it's not something that our evolution has forced upon us. So I know there's a lot of theories out there on why people think we came to it. Now, William Lane Craig would call that the genetic fallacy too, saying how you came to a belief is it should take precedence over why you have that belief. So
true. Well, the genetic fallacy.
It's an interesting.
Say there's a lot of things that I end up agreeing with Craig on. There's a lot more that I disagree with him on, obviously. But for me, I think the big takeaway there, though, is that if it was found tomorrow that objective moral, that, like, if the conversation that's been going on for thousands of years on objective versus subjective versus relativistic versus insert your moral framework here, if that conversation ended tomorrow and we found definitively what stemmed from it, really wouldn't affect my day at all. Because I'm not threatened by whatever type of moral structure might end up being the case. If I'm wrong, then I get corrected. That's pretty much the end result of that. Now, if it turns out that all that stems from a god, then I'm wrong on two things as opposed to one thing, and I just have to change myself based on that. But it doesn't bother me at all. Also, a lot of people are saying in the chat that Red Pill Religion Philosophy got suspended on Twitter, and yeah, I agree with that.
He did. He did get suspended. I actually looked him up. I tried to click on his thing to see what he was doing last night after I left, and gone.
It's gone. And I'm not a fan of deplatforming people, but I also understand that as an advocate for free speech, if I say something utilizing my free speech and somebody feels the need to punch me in the face because I said something so outlandishly stupid and hurtful, the free speech goes both ways. So... yeah, no, he did a dumb thing on Twitter, and so Twitter treated him like he did a dumb thing on Twitter.
Yeah, I know, and I'd like to know, I wonder if he's permanently suspended. His other account was permanently suspended, so...
We'll see. My only issue is that people I don't know if it's a good idea for me to group people like Dean in the same category as people like Anderson, because they have two different sets of ideals. I find them both harmful, but I find them harmful for different reasons. So I don't want to group them in the same category, but I will say that people who end up following leaders of any movement like that, the way that they followed Dean, the way that some people have followed Anderson, even the way that some people have followed Dawkins as well. I think that it's really harmful to go into that, because that's how you get, when I did my 4 worst arguments against God, did a video on that last year, and I had a lot of atheists getting mad at me, saying that I was wrong, because one of the arguments that I said needs to stop being used is the argument that Christians or any theist is delusional. I said that needs to stop being used because it's patently wrong, and even if it were right, it wouldn't add anything to your argument. And I have screenshots from there of people's comments where they said, no, it's definitely a mental illness, it's definitely a delusion. I'm like, why are you defending that?
Yeah, and I think it makes no, I've been called that. I've had people on Twitter tell me you're delusional or you're schizotypal. I love that. I'm saying, have you actually looked up what it means to be schizotypal? I'm an extrovert. I mean, everything about me goes against being schizotypal if you actually looked up what the characteristics of that particular disorder are. I'm not schizotypal just because I've had spiritual experiences, and that's what they try to claim. So yeah, there's some people out there who are curiously wound up in the wrong ways, unfortunately.
Smitty has requested that I retract my statement about punching people who offend you as free speech. That's not what my statement was. My statement was that if somebody felt the need to be that way because of something that I said, then that free speech would go both ways. They can say and do whatever they want. Granted, I'm not advocating for the violence that could possibly come from that, but I also recognize that for instance, if I'm in the middle of a group of 15 people and I insult all of them and say that they all deserve to die, burn, etc., there's going to come a breaking point. And I will have earned that breaking point if that happens. If I were to put myself in a situation where I was hurting that many people, if they hit a breaking point, that's less on them and more on me at that point. That's my take anyway. I would not be the person to harm somebody. But
I think we all should strive for that, for treating people properly. I know I've had experiences that haven't been terribly positive sometimes on social media, so I've just learned from them and tried to move on.
Now, and if they want to have that particular conversation with me when it's more the topic of a video, then I'd be fine doing so. I'm not advocating for violence in response for something that somebody has said, but I also am willing to say, for instance, if you have a cult leader who's teaching hundreds of people to harm people, at which point do you go for the source versus going for the individual people who've been duped by the source? Even if the source, like for instance, Hitler, for the most part, as far as we can tell historically, didn't outright kill anybody himself, but his actions led to millions of people dying.
Yeah, Stalin too.
At what point do you go for the source? At what point do you stop the person who's actually causing all of the harm versus the people who've just done the physical harm? So that's just me. That would be just my take on that, is that no, I don't agree with violence in response to something somebody has said, but I also recognize that words have a lot of power, and eventually that power can cause real harm in the real world. And at some point you have to measure where that harm needs to stop.
Mm-hmm. Sure. No, I completely agree with you. I mean, I look at like what's going on. I've done a little bit of studying on what's going on in North Korea, and some of those what they call camps. There was a book called Escape from Camp 14. I mean, those leaders are egregious. Those people who are in those conditions are in the most hellish conditions you could possibly imagine. And what do we do about it? It's still going on today. It's something that's been going on for 50 years. It's awful.
Yep. And I think that probably gets us around a time where we can do a little bit of wrap up. We have been going on for an hour, and the two main things that I wanted to talk about did get talked about, and that evolution, even though we stemmed away from it and got into more academia in general, but evolution doesn't threaten the Christian position. Historicity of Jesus doesn't threaten the atheistic position, and yet somehow we see small groups of people on both camps that feel very threatened by these things for some reason. I don't quite understand it. I used to be one of the people who sat in that camp, but now from the outside looking in, I can't understand the person that I was at that point anymore. But that is just me.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Is I always wonder how many people have gravitated from one position to another position, and even from the YEC position to an old Earth creation position, or even the reverse. What people actually were raised in maybe an old Earth tradition, and then they went to the young Earth creationist movement. So that always intrigues me on people moving about. Inspiring Philosophy said that when he became a Christian, he initially was a YEC. He was a young Earth creationist, and then he moved towards being more of a Hugh Ross type of creationist. And now he says he's a Michael Heiser creationist. And I haven't followed Michael Heiser enough to know exactly what that means, but I think that's interesting when people shift about.
Yeah, I think there's one last thing I would like to point out that I think needs to be addressed since you brought up the people who move their positions. Sometimes, and this is one of the things that I think leads into some of our more tribalistic tendencies. Sometimes when people move from one position to another, let's say that they were part of an extremist Christian group or an extremist group of any kind, and they move away from that. Sometimes they leave the group, but they don't necessarily leave that ideology behind. We see this a little bit when we're talking about like flat earthers, because to be a flat earther, you also generally have to be a geocentrist. And the few flat earthers that I've seen move away from flat Earth end up still being geocentrists because they change their mind on one position, but their actual ideology, their actual methodology for how they come to any type of knowledge, that never changed. So all of the other ideas that should have fallen by the wayside when they changed their position, they didn't, because they only changed their position on one thing and never applied it to everything else that they believed in. I see that happen a lot. I think when you see this sometimes with some atheists who grew up in cults and then left those cults and became more independent, more free thinking, but yet they still end up falling into some of those more tribalistic tendencies that they were raised with. And I think that that's really dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. I think education for people would solve just about all of these problems. And that you brought up a good point with flat earthers. That's a huge concern for me because I think about not so much the person himself or herself who wants to be a flat earther, but if they have kids and they're passing that down to their kids, that's very dangerous. It's a dangerous thing to try to teach your kids that the whole world has colluded to dupe us. That's what they're
You
teaching.
have to take a position that the entire world is against you. It's at that
Yes,
point.
because you have to take a position that Russia was in cahoots with the United States during the Cold War when we were putting men on the moon. You'd have to take that whole thing into as if the world's basically working on duping everybody, and NASA and all these different groups are working to fool us. I mean, it's really a terrible thing. So you basically teach fear.
Yeah, that's a conversation that I got into, and this will be one of the last points that I make. But that's a conversation I got into over Christmas. I don't want to mention who because if they're listening, then I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. But they were very skeptical of like something like the moon landing, and I was just like, who were we against during that time? Russia. Who was racing us at that time? Russia. Who had every single reason in the world to point out that we had faked something if we did? Russia. Like, there's no reason to say that, well, your enemy was collaborating with you. How? We were literally under threat of thermonuclear war. That was not a thing. They didn't have a reason to support us. But
Yes, exactly. And that's just one of many things. I mean, even just looking at the change of seasons, the tides, there's so many reasons not to go for that position, but that anyone who has even an inkling of education can figure out. So it's a big concern.
well, usually the only thing that I can see that they'll do is they'll appeal to something like when the USS Maine was sunk. The USS Maine was sunk, and I believe we blamed it on Mexico, even though they did not sink it. But our media used it as a method of inciting the people and the populace. But the mere fact that we have one instance, the USS Maine, where this historically happened, and we historically went into a conflict where everybody thought that another country that did nothing wrong in this particular situation did something, it does not mean that you can then take that as the gold standard and apply that to every scenario ever throughout the rest of time.
You're right. It's irrational to do. it's it's irrational, and it shows a corrupt thought process.
Yeah, and I think that's why when you have your flat earthers that become that stay geocentrists, it's because that thought process was corrupted. It never changed. It never improved. I'm glad that they got rid of the one bad ideal, but it's like believing that it's like when somebody's homophobic and says that, homosexuals need to be executed for XYZ reasons. And if they change their position on that, but then they say, well, Muslims need to be executed, and they just cite the same reasons that they said for homosexuals. It's like, well, your thought process didn't change. You were convinced that one group of people didn't fall into your categories, but your categories are still completely fallacious.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I've heard the person that you've spoken with not too long ago who actually had the former view that you just mentioned. So it's an unfortunate position, terribly unfortunate.
It is, but we live in a world where these people exist, and they need to be talked to, and at least shown that the other people around you are still human. There's nothing about their religion, and there's nothing about their sexuality, there's nothing about their practices that make them less human. So just treat other people as if they are your fellow human beings. You'll benefit society better if you do. Trust me.
Seems like a simple concept, right? Treat people well.
Yeah, it seems to be a hard concept for some people to understand. But with that said, I do think that is where we're going to wrap it up. Is there any closing thing that you'd like to say before we hop out, SJ?
No, I want to say thank you for having me on and having a nice chat today. It was very amicable as always, and I'm glad I came on. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, I thank everybody who hopped in for the conversation today. I know normally this is the day where we go over extremist blogs and stuff, or go over Matt Powell's movies, but this was a little different, a little bit of a change of pace. Figured this would be enjoyable. Hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all in tomorrow's video.